Joining us now in studio is Dr. Rick Harper, Director of the Studer Institute, to talk about the Pensacola Metro Report and what it reveals about our community. Thank you so much for being here. And I just want to say in front of everyone what a privilege it is to have worked with you on this project, and as we worked together over the years. But this was really fun.
It was a blast. I really enjoyed it, but then I'm kind of a data nerd myself, so I'm happy to work with other people of the same persuasion, and it was just very informative and a lot of fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely, and we had a ton of data to nerd out over. We were just talking at the break about our favorite table in the whole section, which sounds deeply nerdy, but it is the forecast for jobs that are predicted to grow in our area between now and 2020. And it has some very stark and I think kind of painful almost things in it that we are really going to need to deal with. The 5 of the 10 jobs, top 10 jobs that are expected to grow in our area over the next 5 to 10 years are service related, and the wage is $10 or $11 an hour or less.
You know, increasingly, the U.S. economy is becoming a service economy. Actually, manufacturing in Florida accounts for less than 5% of employment. So it's not the service nature of the jobs per se that is worrisome. It's the fact that our economy has an underlying structure that a lot of the jobs are on the bottom rungs of the job ladder. I mean, some service jobs are great. You can think of highly skilled professions, people providing services, but our top occupations, cashier, waiter, waitress, retail salesperson, those reflect the nature of the business that we conduct. We do a lot of hospitality, leisure, serve the tourism community. We serve the retiree community. And so I'm not a job snob by any means. Those jobs can be great. They can be stepping stones to better things. And we need them because the people that use those services need those people to work in them. But you're right that often they pay a wage that's not sufficient to support a family. So there is an issue, certainly.
And some of the other, the way that it struck me was combining that information with data in another section of the report about the prevalence of single-parent households, which are mostly headed by women, and the median income in the area as it's divided by gender. Women in our job market are making precipitously less than their male counterparts, and that's 1, 2, 3 strikes now. We're putting on a big chunk of our population to try to get by.
That's also true nationally, even with decades of participation of women in the labor force. You know, women really started in the 1970s to enter the labor force, so that today, actually, labor force participation rates of women in many markets are as high as for men of the same age. But there are challenges. Often women are not advancing to the same levels on the job ladder that their male counterparts are. There's a lot of reasons for that, and it presents a huge challenge when children are growing up in single-parent households, because it's tougher education-wise, it's tougher to find the time to have the family engagement that is desperately needed to give those children the head start that they need to do well in school. So I'm right there with you. I think it's a big issue.
Absolutely, and engaged communities obviously have schools that do better, and that's hard to do when you're just managing to get by and you're getting everybody out the door and you've got to come home and maybe start a second job after that.
You know, one of the best predictors of kids' performance in school and whether they'll go on to university, and I should say that the gap between university-educated people versus folks that didn't finish high school in the job market is bigger than ever before, and it's getting bigger because the economy is so knowledge intensive. And in a competitive global economy, you have to have the skills that the knowledge economy needs. And so we can predict pretty well, given just what zip code a person comes from, what their likelihood of finishing university is. And so one of the interesting findings from this report is the chart about social mobility. What are the chances that a child from the lowest quintile of family income could move up to earn either more than their parents or move into the top quintile? And those findings are that they present challenges for us all, and right here in Pensacola.
Well, I think that's what Jim Clifton, the president of Gallup, says. and I think it's been quoted here maybe by Randy Hammer or somebody in this publication, is dropout is a correlation to hope. And if I'm growing up and I don't think there's a job, I might not graduate. And I think the, a couple things we've talked before is, yeah, we're a lot like, and maybe everybody's, but the goal of this is not to be like. The goal is just to create a better quality of life in our area than we've had, and hopefully the type of quality of life where people want to move here because the pay is good. When I look at the pay, for example, if you look at employees in private companies, not government, and the government, if you might make more, but that's also people paying taxes to make that more, is really below $30,000. And if you look at that, I think that almost means that you could qualify for a Habitat for Humanity house at some of the rates that is our average salary. And as you know, one of the things that I've been pushing since 1996 and try to role model is if we pay our employees more, even though it might look like an expense, I think we'll have better product, better service, and then we'll end up putting that money back into the area to somewhat, even though it's some move around. But the biggest shock I had, Shannon and Rick, was this single household in Escambia County is so much more significant than it was in the rest of Florida. And I think that is, again, you write it about in your takeaways, and that's what I wanted to talk about. Your takeaways talked real clearly. If we don't get these kids ready for first grade, it's going to be pretty tough.
To me, it's all about engagement. If we can get kids engaged at an early age, and that takes family participation, it takes school participation, but if kids showed up for first grade ready to learn, then our community would do so much better on so many dimensions because these things go hand in hand. As we look at the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle for our community, better educational outcomes are going to lead to better health outcomes. They're going to lead to all of the things that we mention in the community dashboard. They're all correlated. Those behaviors go together. But I think the key one, the one that you have to get right to address the others, is education. And that's only going to become more true over time because that's the way the economy is moving. And so I think we have to figure out how to get that right.
When we started this process, of course, Randy and I met with you and your staff, and because we sort of knew we wanted to write on this. We knew what the Institute wanted to do, but that was the issue. What are the metrics? And we didn't say, here's the metrics we think, Dr. Harper. We went to you and said, well, what metrics, if you had to pick, because you can't have 100, if you had to pick a dashboard and you could pick them from your expertise and how you would judge a dashboard for the community. So why don't you talk a little bit about why you and your colleagues, because we didn't influence this was independent at UW, and now of course you're working also at the Institute, but tell us just a little bit about how you selected these.
Well, for me, an ideal community indicator has to come from a credible source. The federal statistical agencies, whether it's Census that does the American Community Survey, they do the decennial census on the zeros every 10 years. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, they don't release data unless they're certain that it meets the statistical validity criteria that mean that we can use it for decision making, for having a good, solid measure of the economy. And so we've looked at a number of things that come from the federal statistical agencies. Those include things such as population, age of the workforce, labor force participation, lots of the income statistics that get generated. We've also looked at educational attainment. What's the high school graduation rate? For the community at large, very important to look at Escambia and Santa Rosa together. Although we also, of course, look at them separately because that's the way the tax dollars flow. But then it's important to look at social indicators as well. That includes things like the crime rate. It includes health measures such as the obesity rate. And when you put those together, it's possible to paint a picture of the community, one that we can monitor over time and also one that we can compare against peer communities. So we can do both of those over time and against other cities.
And if people go on the website, studerinstitute.com, they actually have the dashboard right there. And we're actually going to update it as the data becomes available. So if you look at the dashboard, it looks to me like we've sort of got about the same amount of things moving in the right direction as in the wrong direction, and a couple neutrals.
Actually, The first time we took a look at some of the indicators was way back in 2001, and it's hard to believe it's been that long ago.
Yeah.
There was a 64-page insert to the News Journal well over a decade ago, and the indicator data, the time series, the charts point out the fact that way back in 2001, as you looked at our community, we had lost ground relative to the nation.
That was the first time that Fort Walton area went ahead of us in wages, I believe.
That's right. And so actually the last dozen years have seen improvement for Pensacola. We've picked up relative to the nation in terms of earnings per job. We've picked up even more than that in terms of overall income, because today we've grown older at a faster rate than Florida, a faster rate than the nation. We've aged 14 years over the past 2 generations. Florida and the nation have aged 9 years over the past 2 generations. And what that means is that there's more income coming to our community from Social Security, from Medicare. And so it's been interesting to look at the transition away from what we were 2 generations ago, which was manufacturing, paper, chemicals, and military jobs at the base. We've really seen an increase in service jobs, as Shannon mentioned, and we've also seen an increase in the income that flows to retirees. Really change, a pretty dramatic change in structure over that time.
One of the things that I also liked about the report was there is often a lot of conversation about why can't we have the kind of manufacturing jobs that Mobile has managed to get. You know, people think of the big Airbus plant that's going to go over there, and it seems like, you know, the manufacturing jobs were the gateway to the middle class for many blue-collar people over generations and generations. But Will Rabb does a good job, I think, of laying out that not everything in Mobile is all hearts and flowers, especially compared to what we've got going on over here.
Well, sure. If you look at Pensacola versus Mobile, for example, Mobile actually has fewer jobs today than it did in 2000, whereas Pensacola has, what, about 5 to 6% more jobs than it did in 2000. So in a growing economy, economic opportunity gets created. I personally think that the problems associated with economic growth, keeping up with infrastructure, building new schools, those are better problems to have than the problems of stagnation, where our kids leave home, they move to Orlando, they move to Atlanta. Mobile has held its own in manufacturing jobs, but they're the exception. And the U.S. is becoming more attractive as a manufacturing location. But the reason that is because we have cheap energy. Thanks to fracking, thanks to petroleum extraction, our energy costs are a lot lower than Europe. They're lower than most competitor nations. But another reason that the U.S. is attractive for manufacturing is because manufacturing is so automated these days. When you build a facility, it takes relatively few people to run it. That's why manufacturing jobs have declined. Florida currently has about 300,000 manufacturing jobs. In 1990, we had about 500,000 manufacturing jobs. And that's exactly what the picture looks like nationwide. Great jobs, high wages. You need people to show up every day who know how to run the machines, but it's growing more and more automated.
And we've got to replace that with something meaningful.
We do, and as you look at today's economy, a lot of challenges that we face are the exact same ones that communities around the nation, around the globe face. Globalization, it only takes 2 weeks for a container ship to get from Southeast China to Long Beach, California. And that means, and all those goods are shipped in containers. They're locked. It's not like, well, Quint and I remember Marlon Brando on the waterfront. It was said you couldn't ship Scotch whiskey or Swiss watches because they would never appear at their destination in New York.
Could have been somebody. Well, you know, at the time we have remaining, when I looked, and I've studied a lot of this, you know, we've got some good things going on. You know, Gallup says one of the things you have to do is create excitement to get a lot of people. Certainly we've seen downtown get a lot more positive, a lot more people coming down. They said you have to retain those companies that are getting people from outside. For example, we know that, you know, App River, Avlax, Studer Group, and MCare, when they move downtown in the new building, there'll be 250 employees moving downtown with jobs way above the average. So I think there's some really positive things going on in our community. But as you say in your takeaways, you know, we've really got to, one, keep retaining those employers who do get those jobs, because other people are trying to recruit them. And I think we've got to grab this education. Now, that's the long-term goal, because when we're looking at economic development, every time we tried to think you could do it without improving education, we found out you can't do it without improving education. Even talking to employers, it's talent. We have, Stewart Group has 205 employees, about 105 of them work here, and about 100 of them work throughout the United States. And that is, to get the talent sometimes, you have to allow people to work virtual, and we face that.
Right, and so as you look at the growth of our community, I think there's really a couple of things to emphasize. In addition to education, we have to look at quality of life, quality of place, and so that's why a vibrant downtown is so important, because it makes people want to experience our community, makes them want to live here. And the other thing that's so important is critical mass. If we're going to attract software developers and network engineers, then they have to know that even if the job with Studer Group or whoever it is, App River, doesn't work out, that there's 10 more companies in town that they might be able to work with. And a company, in order to come here, has to know that if one employee doesn't work out, there's 10 more employees with those same skills they could hire. So critical mass is important.
Ken Ford used to always say that. For him to attract talent down to IHMC, he needs them to come and see a vibrant downtown so they can picture themselves living there, playing there, and so on.
But the educational investment is something that takes a little bit of time to pay off. That doesn't always coordinate with the election cycle for folks who want to be able to stand in front of something to cut a ribbon and say, look what I did.
It's a really tough political nut to crack, because the costs come today in the form of resources to educate the children, and the benefits come 10 years, 20 years down the road as a better educated workforce takes its place, earns more money, generates more tax revenue. So it's one of the very toughest political problems, because the benefits are delayed while the costs are today. But we've got to get it right if we want to be a leading community.
You have to, and I talk to people that go around and look for locations for companies, and of course logistics is one. We're not going to be there if we're talking about trucking or something, or airplanes. So then, but the other key element is talent. Can I find the talent? So as you look at this, if there's one or two things that you could walk away with, and we're not giving up, we're going to keep this thing rocking and rolling.
Absolutely.
It's education. Education and that quality of life.
It is education, and I think we have to do a great job in the K through 12 system. Higher education is actually a big economic driver. It's important to have great quality workforce training programs at Pensacola State College, and it's important to realize that every tuition dollar that comes from a student who grows up in Miami-Dade or Orange County, Florida, every tuition dollar they bring to the University of West Florida, that's new money. It attracts a matching dollar from Tallahassee, and then that creates today's economic impact as that spending occurs on faculty and staff, but it also creates tomorrow's workforce. And so education is important in lots of different ways.
Well, that leaves us a ton to talk about, even more. We could go on and on, but we need something to study for the next installment.
We do, so let's study education.
Let's get on to that. All right, well, thank you so much for being with us.